Welcome to the newest episode of the Applied AI podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Andra. I have with me in the studio today Reshma Pillai. Reshma, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you, Jacob. My name is Reshma Pillai, like Jacob mentioned. I have been in this world for quite some time now. My world started when I got my accounting degree. I don't have a computer science background. I love to talk about that a little bit. And as I talk through my experience in this world, you'll hear me kind of touch on the story of going from an accountant to an AI professional. I started my career a lot in accounting practices. So I've done a lot of audit, accounting, tax, treasury, you name it. And fast forward now, the past 11-ish years, I would say my focus has really been in the tech transformation, particularly focused in finance. So really supporting finance professionals. At the beginning, it was very much focused in SaaS plus AI, now SaaS plus AI into a lot of workflow automation. So I've done that quite a lot. I am based out of Salt Lake City, but I've lived around the world. And that's another thing I love to talk about is how we've been talking about AI a lot in this part of the world, how AI has kind of grown into other parts of the world, and how that the cultural aspects and the work modernization aspects of different countries also come into play when we talk about scaling processes. So super excited to be here.
Let's talk about corporate finance specifically. First of all, corporate finance breaks down into a few core functions, and there are many different types of AI.
Yes.
It's not just one thing, and many different ways to apply it. So maybe you can walk us through these, core corporate finance functions and how you see various types of AI and automation making a difference in them today.
Yeah, and I think my experience comes a lot with having networked with my peers and trying different things, and my role in not just here but just broadly across this market. When you talk about a typical accounting function, depending on the company, there's always a few common areas or transactions. We call it accounts payable, accounts receivable. There's a lot of revenue operations. Some accounting functions also hold payroll. That's very interesting because it also touches HR and employee experience. There's always the core controllership, as we call it, the accounting functions, which helps make sure that there is the reconciliation between our journal entries. Very typical with a hybrid model. So when I look at finance based on my experience, and especially I've been on the internal auditor and the external auditor side, so I know the dance really well. I like to break down, regardless of the teams, when you look at finance processes, they kind of break down into four different pillars. The first one is very transaction based. That's where rules come in. A lot of like, okay, this is what invoices look like, whether it's customer or suppliers. Second is a lot of reconciliation and compliance and controls. That's where we make sure that the data that we report on is accurate and we can trust it. Then we look at a lot of what we call forecasting. So how do we use now this data to project what the company is going to look like in a year, in 2 years, in 10 years? Last thing that is really critical, and it's almost like a foundation of everything. If you cannot convert numbers into actual stories, no one's going to understand you. You can sit and talk to investors in numbers, but if you don't convert that into a story and decision making, a lot of leaders, that's what they ask for these days. So to go back to your idea of different type of AI that works. We've gone through so many fast failures. I love that term because we've used so many AI features and just kind of leaned into generative AI, leaned into agentic AI, leaned into a lot of bots, leaned into so many prediction machine learning models. Where I have found a lot of success recently is when you start stringing together different AI technologies. So an example I'll give you is if we are looking at invoices, if there's an AI tool that can read these invoices, really hard PDF copies, make recommendations, and then there is an agent that does the workflow for you, and then there is an AI at the end that helps draft that narrative. I think that's where we have seen the most amount of success is plucking and trying to almost create a recipe for your process based on the different AI technologies. So yeah, super exciting times.
Yeah, I love how you break that down because that's what we're always doing for clients. They want to talk about it as though it's a kind of a monolithic thing and there's one AI that's going to solve a problem. And a lot of times people are, coming from a tech first approach like,
Yes.
hey, I want this technology, and we always say come from a outcomes first approach and then look at workflows. So I have this outcome I want, which is, better forecasting or faster reconciliation or something like that, right? And so then what is the workflow that gets to that outcome? And usually it's heterogeneous, right? It's not one thing that gets you there. It's like a pipeline of steps. And so then when you look at it that way, it becomes very obvious. Okay, for this step, for reading an invoice in PDF format and putting it into the system, converting it to structured data, that's a large language model now is great at that. The OCR capabilities of these large language models are really good. So like, okay, obviously it would be the right task for that. And then if some step of the pipeline involves a predictive capability, we're going to find the right predictive machine learning model to do that, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, again, there might be a large language model that takes this some kind of final output
Exactly.
and now converts that into a narrative form that humans can understand. And so when you
Exactly.
start building it this way, you think less in terms of individual tools and individual platforms and more in terms of being the owner of this pipeline, this workflow, and what needs to actually happen. It's just a very different mindset.
It's so different, and it's so interesting you say that because there's so much hype around AI all the time. I get this all the time when I talk to my peers and talk to similar like accounting professional, just kind of brainstorming what they're doing. They're like, oh my God, very soon AI fatigue is going to be a thing because everyone's talking about AI. Shivani Ahuja, she is at Salesforce. She's, I believe, the SVP of Enterprise IT Strategy. She kind of started talking about how it's really important when you look at AI, you're not looking at, okay, this AI and this use case has to work. And she mentioned how the use case is usually not the problem, it's the house, which means how does your infrastructure kind of enable AI? So in our world, as a leader, my hope is that AI almost becomes this invisible enablement string across all your processes. I think you and I talked a little bit about that. It's about the emphasis on how people created these solutions for use cases and how we are bringing our infrastructure together. And the AI is the thread between that. Because in my experience, when I talk about the 4 pillars of finance, there are processes and issues within each those pillar, but most of the challenges is between those pillars. It's the glue between those pillars. And that's where I think the invisible AI would be super exciting because again the focus is not, oh, let's just get AI to work. It's really about, let's make sure we are focusing on the value and the outcome holistically, which is inclusive of people and systems and the infrastructure.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. All of these stories of people who are just disillusioned with AI because I tried AI and it didn't pan out. In almost every one of those, if you dig deeply into what they actually tried and why it didn't pan out, it's obvious. They didn't decompose things into the proper level of granularity and actually build the right pipeline of value because the value is clearly there, but it's non-trivial. When you come from an outcomes first approach, I want faster reconciliation. The answer is almost never going to be sign up for X platform, get a subscription, and your
Yeah,
problem is solved.
build
It's
this model. Yep.
it's doing the work of actually modeling it out and what those steps are. And when you do that, your chances of having significant value are very, very high because you're doing it pragmatically, realistically, and you can actually fairly accurately model the ROI before you ever even start. You're not approaching it from some blanket position of AI is going to just solve this for me as a kind of magical type of thinking. This magical thinking exists a lot where AI is like a thing that is going to solve my problems for me and make things better. And it's not. It's a basket of diverse technologies, and those technologies need to be plugged in the right ways as part of an overall orchestration, and then you start getting the value. And it's not rocket science, but it is a lot more complex than just getting a subscription and pressing a button.
Agreed, agreed, agreed. I think when I look at myself as someone who modeled that behavior, I truly believe that the accessibility is a huge part of it too. There used to be this mindset, and sometimes in certain companies, I think it still is there. AI is for someone with heavy computer science background. Okay, I know my business and I know what I need to solve in AP, but I need to lean on a technology expert to tell me what the solution is. I want to course correct that and say the solution and what you want to solve, to your point, the outcome of that comes from the person who's actually using it. And now we're in this journey to make AI accessible, not something that sits in these technology experts bucket of things to do, but it's really making sure an accountant can be a designer, an accountant can be a creator. Can we give them the solutions? And that's another thing that is really important, is failing fast but also giving that accessibility, which is hard because we have security protocols, we have data protocols, we have governance, we have SOX controls, we have so many things to think through. But how can we take some of those really low risk, high value, ideas and give our accountants access to build some agents and access to try new things and understand, okay, now you're going into this era of, okay, now they understand the usability of it. And I strongly believe that these days we shouldn't, like, these days there's a lot about AI, but the starting point has changed. It's not going to a finance team and saying, let me tell you what AI actually is. I promise you, 99% of the people there are very well educated. They are well versed in AI and they understand it. They just want you to tell them how to get their things to work. And that's where the conversation should really start.
Yeah, that's really astute because that's about orchestration. It's not about what AI can actually do, but it's about how do you orchestrate the entire sequence of events, including the non-AI factors, the human factors, the integrations with other systems, the data storage where you're pulling the data from, the context engineering that needs to be built, like all of it, right? It's less about the raw AI capabilities and more about orchestrating intelligently so that these capabilities are embedded in a workflow, a pipeline that actually produces the outcome you.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's also really important to highlight and educate and create some awareness around where AI hasn't worked, right? Like, where have we tried and put the investment in, and where we think we haven't scaled. And oftentimes it is because we start with a subset, and as we increase that subset, we realize, oh, we need to clean up our data house. We need to clean up. And you can argue a lot of the times, even in the general. So it's again finding that balance of controls and compliance and security, and also the real usability. How long does it take for an auditor to approve that now you're going to use AI to report your data? That is still scary in the audit world, right? That there is still some ways to go in the finance world in terms of how reliable are those AI solutions.
Yeah, and again, that, if you're talking about a large language model, that's a valid concern. If you're talking about some much more deterministic predictive model, those are much less prone to hallucinations and other problems. So again, there's some problems even around just using AI as a catch-all term for this diverse set of technologies. So, the conversation needs to be had, like, when we're talking about, we're concerned about giving AI access to our data, that it might, make stuff up. What are we actually giving access? Are we giving a predictive engine? Are we giving a, Luma Warp, to Dr. Posse's machine learning model that can extract these patterns much more efficiently from data and is, very deterministic, not prone to these hallucinations? Or are we giving, Claude access to it, and so on and so forth? And then what safeguards and, checks do we have on those? So again, people tend to use these broad brushes when it's very, very nuanced, and the difference between success and failure can be down to some small detail that has to be, attended to. So I think that's all some of the nuance that gets
Yes,
glossed over.
absolutely. I think the one thing when you talked about the success and failures, what we have found really successful, and as we, like Sydney and I've been talking about it, Sydney, who was your recent podcast guest, we passionately talk about how do we create opportunities for people in this space, right? Folks who are coming back into the workforce, and how AI can even fast track their careers. One thing that we noticed is that trend of creating the accessibility is that success and failures go hand in hand. I think they're both equally critical. The timing matters. Most companies don't have the time and the patience to be like, we're going to take 8 months to build this and then we're going to fail. So how do we cut down the time it takes to build something and fail? That is a really important topic of discussion we've been talking a lot about, is creating the capacity to innovate and fail, creating the capacity to try something. So for example, to your point, if we give access to a small subset of really critical data and want to test out a model, how quickly can we do that? And I think that is, as you start looking into the market, that range is pretty wide. Some companies do it in 3 sprints or 3 weeks, or some companies need a year. And I think that's where it continues to go back into the entire orchestration. And like to Shubhani's point, the house. How ready are you to innovate and fail? using
Yeah.
AI. Our biggest success has always come from failing fast and then stabilizing and then really finding the value. It's like, okay, now we've failed a couple of times, so we know what's going to work and where we need to put in more thought and where we need to invest in those resources. So the timing of that is also becoming a big cost to the companies. How much time do we have?
That's such a good point. And let's just say you were my client and you're considering investing
Yeah,
8 months and some very large amount of money, a pilot project. I would say, no, I can actually create something that's not going to be secure. It's not going to be compliant with any of your compliance requirements. But in 3 weeks, I'll be able to demonstrate the value to you, and we'll do it on synthetic data. I can then show you with commercial off-the-shelf tools, probably stringing a set of tools together, or whatever we need to do. There might be one platform I can show. As an aside, people tend to think in terms of platforms. That's the wrong approach. You think in terms of capabilities, and then it's like
100%.
maybe I'm showing you that it's maybe this functionality is spread across like 3 different off-the-shelf tools. Like one part happens in this off-the-shelf tool, another part happens in that off-the-shelf tool, another part happens in a third. Maybe it's two, maybe it's one, maybe it's five. It doesn't matter. It's the capability that matters. So I'm showing you the capability in 3 weeks, and you can see on synthetic data how well it's working or not. And then that can be validated and easily extrapolated out of like, well, it's either going to be worth it to invest the money in building this in-house or it's not. And there might even be some, plug and play capabilities even for the fully compliant version. That gets into the build versus buy conversation of like, do you build it in-house? Do you buy something off the shelf? Or do you do a hybrid approach, which is we're going to buy certain components, but then do some of our own internal scaffolding and wire them together, and so there we would help advise on all of that as well. But that's the kind of approach you need to have, not as you say, this kind of you have to fail a lot faster to
Yes, yes,
or
100%.
succeed a lot faster.
Yeah, and I mean, it's evolved into this now, but I will tell you, there was a time where every company wanted to get like 10 AI programs out and implemented. I think there's a lot of conversations we've had in the past 5, 6 years in terms of, failing fast is what is going to create real value. Because it's not just about, I always go back to the people aspect of it. There is a big difference between reading about AI online in media and then putting it to real use and seeing the output of that. I still get so many people be like, wow, did AI really create this dashboard? Can I just create a dashboard in like 30 minutes? And I'm like, you can do it. We don't need to submit a ticket and go and do it. You can do it yourself. I think that excitement is what I think we need to nurture and really kind of talk through. That's where I think the fast fail aspects come along in the journey. Is it used to be an idea, but now that it's accessible to more folks than technology experts or someone with a computer science background, it is becoming more of this is like, I always use this analogy. Is like, imagine you had your Excel reconciliation workbook and you had to create your formulas, but you didn't have access to your formulas. You have to submit an IT ticket to create your formulas. You're not going to be successful long term. You're going to waste a lot of time. The timing also comes back to educating and supporting people who are not just in that IT umbrella to also create these solutions long term. And we're seeing a lot more of that, which is where creating a space for invisible AI and taking our skills to becoming more of that AI experts is super helpful.
Invisible AI is a cool term. It so well describes this idea that you should have the kind of human interfaces wherever you need them, but certainly no more than you need, right? The old SaaS model of 50 dashboards from 50 different SaaS providers is going to go away, and what you need is outcomes, and you need workflows to happen the way that they need to happen to get those outcomes. And there will need to be human expertise injected at the right points of those workflows. And that's where you need those interfaces built, but certainly not the old SaaS models. It's really cool that you see that, because it seems like not a lot of people are catching on that is the future yet.
Yeah, and it's exciting because when we talk through that, the part that is really important, especially when we talk about finance, as we start relying on the data, there are a lot of controls. And there are these IT controls, and then there are these manual controls. A lot of the times when we think through AI, We talk about the technology and the outcome, but there's also, okay, what does controls look like in the world? How are you going to put in SOX controls to test an agent? What does that look like? It's a really important discussion as we kind of start thinking about this framework. And to your point, invisible AI is great. And even I was talking about human in the loop the other day. And as we talk about invisible AI and human in the loop, auditors would argue, okay, I don't want someone to just check. That's not a control for me. How did you make sure that AI did it right? Because the overall theory is humans can be lazy. Like once you know that the AI is doing it right, you can be complacent. What if you miss a big dollar value ticket, right? So how do we kind of make AI invisible? And I think that the core foundation of it, especially when you talk about finance and audit, is how can we work between that lines of compliance and making sure we have checked everything, but also lean on AI as a technology so that we don't have to check everything. It's an interesting concept and a debate in the finance world because most auditors are like, you have 16 controls. Have you executed on all of your controls? When you implement AI, you soon realize those controls start to go down. So, how do we provide that accuracy and trustworthy relationship between data to our audit and compliance experts who are like, okay, I trust this. I trust that you've done the work. Now it's an agent, not a human. And I think it's getting there. It's a really important discussion as we start talking about relying on AI to harvest on these value, but it is something that we have to be thoughtful about and start working together. I think that's also included in the future of that invisible AI is the compliance aspect of all of it, if you ask a finance expert.
That's so true. And it brings us, kind of full circle to what we started the conversation with. So if you think from first principles about outcomes, you want a system that makes your company more efficient, better capabilities at prediction, all the outcomes you want, right? But you also want security, you want low risk. And so thinking from those first principles, again, decomposing the workflow into its constituent parts, and then what is the risk profile of the different subcomponents, and then how do you mitigate that risk? You can have risk mitigation agents that have a certain agentic workflow specifically around risk mitigation. And then to, as a backstop against those, if you feel you need to, you can have human in the loop. And a lot of this can be prototyped out in advance to see how well this is working, right? And so you can have these dials where, the human in the loop element is turned up more initially and can gradually be dialed down over time. And this all has to be carefully designed, engineered, and orchestrated. So these are not just raw AI capabilities. This is systems design. This is
Exactly. Yep.
human psychology design. This is like a multidisciplinary process. And to get back to this idea that people tend to think just in terms of broad brush and monolithic AI capabilities. No, this is much more than that. And it can all be done if you think from first principles and you calibrate the system correctly and then adjust as you go.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And we've come a long way in that journey. I think it's an evolution of how we use it. First, it was education. Now we're getting into the accessibility and usability and the infrastructure. Now is the reliability. It's like I kind of talk to my team about that all the time, which is it's the face of using any kind of tech. When SaaS started, we had the same challenges, right? It's just going through those principles and seeing how we can scale something like this and really kind of see the value out of it. So couldn't agree with you more.
Excellent. Well, it's been so good talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Appreciate it, and always excited to kind of talk through how in today's world, AI can create a lot of opportunities for people from very diverse backgrounds. And it's been exciting to sometimes I've seen in the market some of the greatest AI solutions actually come from people who have no AI background but are really kind of thinking through solutions because that's all they know. So super excited about the evolution of how that greater AI accessibility can be a thing while we also continue to bank on invisible AI. So congratulations on all the work you guys are doing, Jacob, and happy to be a part of this.
Thank you, thank you. And just one final thought on something you said about that, it's not necessarily the people with a computer science background. Sometimes it's the people who can think in terms of complex systems, first principles, cause and effect, and really like critical thinking and breaking things down. Sometimes those now in today's world are, and the ability to synthesize and see how things intersect and impact each other Sometimes those are almost more important than the raw computer science skills, and both have their place. But I agree, we're entering a different world where skill sets matter differently in different ways, the way that AI is modulating all that. So it's an exciting time for sure.
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you, Jacob, and good luck with everything.
Okay, bye.